What are your thoughts on the dimension that domestic violence seems to have got into? It used to be, Femi earlier on said it used to be more women crying out and say they're experiencing one form of domestic violence or abuse. But now the men have joined in, so it's not a gender thing anymore. Let's begin from there.
Yeah, on that issue, I say we'll have the feminists to thank. Since there has been the advent of equality and equity, we have begun to experience a categorization of humans as humans and not just men or only women or only men. It's now a thing of just humans. It's that men are now being considered as people too. In the past, men used to be superheroes and divine creatures that shouldn't have any pain, boys shouldn't cry, and all of those kind of things that excused a lot of toxic masculinity. But now there's a lot of cry outs because in as much as people are being treated equally in terms of women being given opportunities, it has now been experienced that men are being considered as people too, and the emotions, feelings, and the hurts that are occurring to the young male Nigerian is now being considered as a general problem. Thank you very much.
All right. According to the statistics, state government, about 340 cases have been reported in the last 1 year. Cases you have women beating their husbands. What do you think is largely responsible for this trend now, and what can be done to change the narrative?
Like I said earlier, women beating their husbands is not something that started today. It's just men never used to cry out until it became okay for, men to be heard now in society. It's not a new thing. There's nothing new under the sun. However, the existence also of a more uniform way of addressing people and not just as men or as women. Oh, you're a man, you shouldn't feel this, or you're a woman, you shouldn't be able to handle this. Those equalities have allowed things to come out more in the open. It's not as if it's today that women just started beating their husbands. It's something that is often reported. I believe that women are just as abusive as men. It's just society has excused a lot of things to be hidden from the public view. It's going to be very hard for you to find a guy who would come out and tell you about how he was punched by his lady. Also, the body mass index of men makes it such that when a man does an act of violence towards a woman, he is capable of doing more damage than a woman to a man. Not like a woman cannot do any physical damage to a man. It's just the body mass index permits that men can do more damage in larger percentage of men can do more damage than women. But because society has made it okay now for us men to voice out, then we're beginning to hear more about women violence on men as much as men being as abused as women. It's just back in the day, there was always the principle of boys don't cry. And that's why we never heard much of it. Thank you very much.
In seeking protection from further domestic violence or trying to get justice, what are some of the barriers that the victim may suffer with the legal system?
Evidence, mainly. Similar to the last conversation we had, it's the most important thing to prove an abuse is adducing evidence. In the event where you are unable to get to a competent hospital that can document the abuse that has happened to you, then what is the proof? It is just your word against his. In an event where a person has suffered violence and they don't have a way of documenting or getting a third party's opinion that will support their claim, then it's an issue of this person's word against this person. That's the only barrier so far. Besides the controversial whether or not you can afford the justice system or afford the police, it's those other things are just secondary, because we also discussed in the last segment, the VAP Act now allows that you can personally enter a prosecutorial position for certain abuses that have happened to you. So the advent of that act does not limit you to wait only for law enforcement to act on your behalf, especially in an event where you don't trust the police. Or I mean, many people have their own reasons why they're afraid of going to the police. However, for whatever reason the person has, PTSD or whatever, there is also grounds for you. There's also the room, that's an avenue that is available for people to make actions in their own capacity in event of violence, and that is through the VAP Act.
All right.
Thank you.
Richard, glad to have you join us once again.
Thank you very much.
Now, going by the provisions of the law, I would like you to educate us on what constitutes domestic violence or abuse. Going by the provisions of the law, for you to enlighten us on what constitutes domestic abuse and violence.
Yes. Domestic abuse and violence is provided for in the criminal code. I'm sorry, I cannot produce the sections right now. In the penal code, in the VAP Act, and in every other body of statutes that covers violence and protection of individuals generally. Now, violence can come in different forms, and it is provided for statutorily and in case law. Violence can come in multiple forms. Violence can come physically, can come mentally, can come emotionally as well. The most valuable thing that a person can do for themselves in expressing an occasion of violence that has occurred to them, or in reporting such an occasion, is to secure the services of a legal practitioner that will source out the necessary and the most applicable principle of violence to your action. In the event where a person has suffered certain abuses and the actions are not brought under the proper provision of law, then in that instance, the abuser can get away with the actions that have occurred to him. For instance, in the past, when there was the discussion of whether or not a child's molestation can be defined as rape or defilement, in instances where those actions were brought under rape, under the criminal code, the abuser was seen to have walked away. It's not because the judicial system was incapable of convicting. It was just that the action was not brought under the actual and the permissible provision of law that would have tagged the offense to the action. And for that reason, it is necessary to secure legal representation such that the action can be brought with commensurate acts that will punish it. Thank you very much.
Of emotional abuse, for instance, so even mental abuse, what kind of proof would be relevant?
That is quite difficult, especially in the country that we reside in, where people hardly turn to therapists or psychologists for help, for fear of being called mad people. But in instance of emotional abuse, I would tell you, according to the book, what is most essential to prove is a report of a therapist or a psychiatrist. They are the ones who could draw a possible assessment of how a person's mental capacity or a person's mental engagement has depreciated from a certain instance to another instance. It is also very difficult to prove, except it has also shown some sort of degree of damage on the person's maybe the person's outlook or the person's reactions towards things. And these things are going to be difficult to prove, except you can get a report of a therapist. It is essential that Nigerians begin to consult more with therapists and psychologists who can help them to get through things, because a lot of issues are being buried in our society today as just stress or any other name but mental illness that it truly is. And because there is the shaming of people who go to psychiatrists as being mad people. I mean, the most renowned psychiatrist in Lagos is at Yaba Left. And if you're sitting with your friends and you tell them that, oh, it's almost time for my session at Yaba Left, I'm sure you won't sit with them tomorrow. So it is what we need to take out is shaming, most especially. We need to take out victim shaming, and then we would see more people confront their mental issues and their emotional issues, because they are very similar. The mental and emotional issues are literally cousins, because it's the mental issues are things of maybe how they behave and how they process, and the emotional issues similarly to are things of how they feel and how they process. So these issues are things that can be best handled with a competent psychiatrist, and further to it, in the event where there is an abuser, then a legal practitioner. Thank you very much.
Right. I would like us to provide some information for victims now on how they can seek legal redress or legal intervention in cases where they are abused. What are the practical steps to be taken? What are the practical, maybe the documents, the requirement for their cases to be substantial?
There is no specified form or document that must be obtained in proving abuse, mental abuse or abuse or violence in any form. There's no specified form that must be obtained. However, I would tell you that there are procedures that should be observed in order to establish a good case, a quality case, or a quality report for abuse and violence. In such instance that it is physical or even emotional, or that requires medical attention, it is important to, at the quickest instance, access the medical practitioner documentation before eventually reporting or petitioning through a legal practitioner to law enforcement. Immediately this is done, then a copy of such medical report can be attached to enable the police to take towards the petitions, because the police and law enforcement generally receive a lot of petitions. And so in order for you to bring your actions to them and make your action as quality as it is, you must even do half their work for them. It's not because they're not competent to, but it's just so you can establish that it is glaring. So in that instance where a medical report is attached, then the police have no option but to investigate the petition. Now, in an instance where the police go ahead to investigate the petition, then they get to prosecute the individual if, after investigation, I have been fully convinced that there has been an abuse or some sort of violent act done to the complainant. Then there is a prosecution done, whereby the charge is drafted and the abuser is made to plead guilty or not guilty to the charge. On the civil end of it, and that's on the criminal end of it, going through law enforcement and the police. On the civil end of it, you have an individual who has suffered some sort of violence or abuse, who, again, I would advise, first of all, and most importantly, get a professional's report. The report of a professional is taken so seriously, such that it is provided for in the Evidence Act, that in the instance where a professional in any field gives a report about an occurrence that states the truth of that action having happened, or the validity of or existence of a thing, those things should be taken very seriously by the judges. Now, get that report of a professional, a medical professional that will assess and establish the occurrence of violence or an abuse on the individual. Obtain that and attach to most like maybe a demand letter or a cease and desist of some sort of letter, notifying the individual in the first instance that such report has been brought about them, and allowing them to address the issue. That is, if you want to go through the civil angle, or in any case, establishing the evidence of the abuse happening and immediately filing an action under the relevant provision of the VAPP Act of 2015. Thank you very much.
Ensuring that the victim gets justice or even prevent further abuse, the victim, like you said, would need legal services. But that is not something everyone can afford or every victim can afford. In cases where they cannot afford it, are there agencies of government dedicated to providing pro bono services for them, and is it effective?
Yes. There are multiple services that are available for justice for people who cannot afford justice. I mean, there's legal aid. There are the law clinics of several universities that are open to that. I can tell you, for one, Bayes University has a quality legal clinic that will take up your matter any day and do it for you for next to nothing, literally nothing. There are other legal human rights bodies, the Human Rights Commission, and many other human rights bodies that I can't even begin to call out for lack of time. There are many human rights commissions that will take up your actions for free. There are many young lawyers that will take up a quality action in the event where you have helped yourself to a very solid point. There are many young legal practitioners that are looking for an opportunity to take up a landmark matter. So in an event where a person has, let's take for instance, consulted a psychiatrist, and they have obtained a quality medical report showing that such a person's action have caused a mental breakdown of this other individual. That's a landmark case that I don't think many Nigerians have been able to establish in court. And that's an action that would attract almost any law legal practitioner to take up for free or almost free. But specific to your question, there are many human rights bodies that are open to taking people's cases. There are many NGOs, legal NGOs, that are established just for this act. There are NGOs established for all sorts of categories of people, for children, for women, for widows. Like there's Daughters of Abraham Foundation for women and children and females. Generally, it's mainly for women. That foundation will take up any action of abuse or trafficking of any sort. That's Daughters of Abraham, Daughters of DOAF, Daughters of Abraham Foundation, yes. And there are many other bodies similar to that. These NGOs that are made specifically for certain categories of individuals would most likely, if not 100% always, take up actions against an individual who falls within the category of their beneficiaries and take up such actions, even if they don't prosecute personally, employ the service of a legal practitioner of high quality that will prosecute such violence and abuse.
All right, great. For perpetrators of domestic violence, what are the likely consequences under the provisions of the law for those who perpetrate these acts of domestic violence, for men, for women, and I think children too, if possible?
Yes. Under the criminal code and the penal code on the criminal code, it's mainly jail term, no less than 7 years. Under the depending on the category and the degree of it all. And in the penal code, there's even lashes of the cane. There's caning involved because the penal code is more akin to the north. Under the VAP Act, there's monetary, There's monetary compensations that could be paid. It looks a little like small, but the court has the discretion of increasing the monetary damages that can be paid to the individual, as well as jail term. So there's no limit to the punishments that can happen, but there's no death sentence for abuse or violence. But there's jail term and there's monetary damages that can be awarded to the abusee, to the abused person.
To what Femi asked, first of all, I find that the punishment for the penal code a bit funny, where lashes have to be given to maybe a perpetrator. It seems like trying to correct violence with violence. But aside from that, do you think that there's any need to review the punishment for perpetrators of domestic violence?
Not necessarily, except violence against children. But domestic violence, jail term, and for like to an adult or to a person who has the wherewithal and the mental capacity to handle it, maybe a grown individual above 21, maybe the punishments available are sufficient, I may say. However, in instances of young people and children, babies, infants, I think there should be a review on the punishments available. I think more scary punishments should be brought into the conversation. There should be more stringent, more heinous punishments that should be brought about for abusers of children and infants. I think it should. I think it's worthy of conversation right now to include other. I don't know. I don't want to say anything specific, but I think it's necessary for us to reopen that part and maybe include something more horrific as the act itself. Thank you very much.
All right. I would like to find seek your opinion in cases where victims don't want to speak up. You know, we have this culture in this climate where people, because of the stigma, they don't even want to seek legal intervention How much of impact will this be on seeking justice in a place like Nigeria?
It's going to hinder the pursuit of justice. When a person can't come out to report, then where is the case? I mean, if no offense has been established, then there is no wrong done. There's no case to handle. There's no case to answer for. I think what should happen is these NGOs that have been set up for certain categories of individuals, human rights bodies, should look into offering services to people and while protecting them and giving them anonymity. However, back to the VAP Act again, it permits, now under the VAP Act, especially with offenses that are against children and offenses bordering on violence, it permits that an individual can take up action on behalf of another. Now, in an instance where a friend of mine has been abused by someone else and I learn of it, I can take up the action on his behalf as according to the provisions of the VAP Act. Like I said, the VAP Act is rich and it is recent and it is modern and it allows for protections of more offenses, protections against, more offenses, and it allows also the flexibility for the actions to be taken on behalf of others. So even in an instance where people are afraid to come out because of how they will be treated for it, they can be prosecuted in representative capacity. That is, they have nothing to do with the action, and the action is taken up on their behalf. I think that is a very, very commendable method that the VAP Act has taken, a commendable approach that the VAP Act has taken in helping to take actions on behalf of people who are more quiet about what they have experienced. Thank you very much.